Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Across State Lines. I'm your host, Danielle. Thank you so much for tuning into episode 12 of the podcast, where today we will be discussing the 1988 disappearance of Myron Traylor out of Phoenix, Arizona. You might notice that I cover a lot of Arizona cases on the podcast, and that's because when I began writing unsolved articles, I primarily focused on my home state and have covered over 100 missing persons cases and unsolved murders from Arizona. However, I have branched out and I have covered numerous cases from other states and even international cases, so stay tuned in the future where you might hear a case that unfolded in your own hometown. In 1988, 13-year-old Myron Traylor was heading to his grandmother's home with his mother, Debbie, to wash some clothes before heading to Vacation Bible School for the evening, when they passed a fish and chip shop. Myron told his mother that he wanted to stop for a drink, and she allowed him to pop into the shop and told him to meet her at his grandmother's when he was done. Myron got his drink, spoke to the employee at the shop, and left, and was never seen again. During the investigation, numerous suspects came to light. 2 mysterious letters were delivered to the family home, and the discussion of gangs, drug dealers, and even the mafia swirled about, but Myron has never been found all these years later. But before we dive into the case, I want to remind everyone that Across State Lines is now available on all podcast streaming platforms, such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and anywhere else that you might listen. If you are liking Across State Lines and would like to leave us a rating or a review, it would be greatly appreciated. If you want to leave us any feedback, please visit our website and send us an email. Thank you so much for listening, and now, let's dive into the case of Myron Traylor. Myron Timel Traylor was born on October 1st, 1974, and he grew up in the Phoenix Valley. By the summer of 1988, 13-year-old Myron had finished up his 6th grade year at Sierra Vista Elementary School and was just beginning to enjoy his summer vacation. Myron was described as quiet and a well-behaved boy who loved to draw and read and was very active in his church and school. He was a regular attendee of Southminster Presbyterian Church, where he sang in the choir and joined the youth group, making a lot of friends. He had just joined a baseball team and loved playing and roughhousing with his friends at school and on the team. Myron was also eager to go on a church trip to Disneyland, and in order to raise money for it, he began to deliver newspapers along a route in his neighborhood. Myron lived with his mother, Debbie, during the summertime, and during the school year, he lived with his Aunt Sandra. This allowed Myron and his brother to attend a better school than he would have been able to attend had he lived with his mother year-round. At the time of Myron's disappearance, his father was in prison, and it is unclear if Myron had a relationship with him or not, but it is stated that the two had little contact. Debbie had a boyfriend at the time named Geddes Leroy Mintz. On the evening of July 27, 1988, Myron and his mother were walking from their home to Myron's grandmother's place to wash some clothes, as their washing machine was broken. Mother and son were also eager to call Myron's half-brother, who was staying with an uncle in California. After a visit at Myron's grandmother's, the plan was to walk across the street and pick up Myron's best friend, and the 2 boys were to take a bus to their local church for Vacation Bible School. Myron and his mother took this walk almost every night, but this particular evening, Myron was having trouble tolerating the heat. Temperatures were hovering around 105 degrees Fahrenheit, or 40.5 degrees Celsius, at 6 p.m., and Myron had already spent a lot of time outside that afternoon, working his newspaper route. Myron was in need of a cold drink, and when he saw the OK Fish and Chips restaurant up ahead, he saw his chance. OK Fish and Chips was located on 16th Street and Southern Avenue in Phoenix at the time. He asked his mother if he could stop inside the restaurant for a soda. Debbie agreed, telling him that she would meet him at his grandmother's once he was done. She knew Myron knew the route well, so Debbie continued on her walk, and Myron stopped into the restaurant. Myron approached the counter and ordered a cherry Coke, Lena Watt was working the cash register that day, and she knew Myron from around the neighborhood, but didn't know his name. The two chatted for a bit while Myron drank his soda, and then he asked for a refill to take with him. When he was done, Myron waved goodbye to Lena, thanking her, and left the store walking in the direction of his grandmother's house on Pecan Street. Myron would always walk the same path to his grandmother's home. Once he passed OK Fish and Chips, he would cross the street, walk through a business parking lot, then finally cut through a dirt lot which ended on Pecan, leading him to his grandma's. Debbie was checking out the front window for Myron, and as each minute passed, her worry grew. She was expecting to see him walk up the road carrying his laundry and soda, but he never arrived as expected. At 7 p.m., Debbie retraced Myron's route looking for any sign of him, but found nothing. She entered OK Fish and Chips and spoke to Lena. Lena told Debbie that Myron had stopped in for a soda, was the only customer in the restaurant at the time, and that when he left, he was alone. No one had been standing outside the store, sitting on the patio, or lingering around the iron gates that surrounded the shop. She relayed to Debbie the same story, that Lena had said goodbye to Myron and he waved back to her before he went out the doors. Lena stated that she watched Myron walk around the corner before he slipped out of sight. After Debbie spoke to Lena, she quickly went back to her mother's home and called the Phoenix Police Department. Initially, they didn't seem concerned at all, stating that since he was a teenager, he likely met up with friends and would return shortly. When this didn't happen, Debbie continued to call the department. Finally, around 2 a.m., the Phoenix Police Department sent an officer to take a report. Thankfully, this officer saw the seriousness of the situation, and a search for Myron began. The next morning, the pastor from Myron's church gathered volunteers by the busload to search the areas that Myron was last seen. They accompanied police as they scoured the field that was along the boy's route, walked the streets handing out flyers, and gathered more volunteers to aid in the search. 2 detectives were assigned to the case, and those detectives canvassed the areas around the restaurant to see if anyone had spotted Myron once he had left. They discovered that 4 people had seen Myron once he left OK Fish and Chips, but none were able to tell police which direction he had gone. One person that they spoke to who claimed to have seen Myron was Geddes Mintz, Debbie's boyfriend. He claimed that he had seen Myron swinging his laundry bag as he entered the fish restaurant. Geddes stated that this was in the business complex across the street, but he had left the area before Myron exited the restaurant. Investigators also spoke to Lena Watt, who confirmed that Myron came into the restaurant around 6 p.m. She stated that he was extremely polite and extremely thirsty. She recalled how they spent some time talking as he quickly drank his soda, before asking for another one and heading on his way. She reiterated how she hadn't seen which direction he had walked off, nor did she see anyone else around the restaurant at the time. Detectives also brought in Debbie for questioning as well, and asked her to take a polygraph test, which she agreed to. Debbie passed the test and was not initially considered a suspect in the disappearance of her son. Rumors began to fly around Myron's disappearance. Depending on which local you asked, everyone had a different theory. Some would say that Myron ran away. Another rumor was that he was sexually assaulted and buried near his home. And another was that his mother had sold him for drug money. All of these rumors were beginning to spread, but none brought investigators closer to the truth. One theory of many that emerged came from a persistent caller who regularly phoned police with a tip. This caller stated that Myron's death came about due to a well-known crack dealer in South Phoenix. This drug dealer had continuously bragged about sexually assaulting a child before murdering him by beating him over the head with a rock. The caller stated that the drug dealer was heavily intoxicated as he confessed this, and went on to say that the man buried the child in the backyard of a home close to Myron's house. The man had had a fight with his wife the night of Myron's disappearance and had gone to OK Fish and Chips, had gotten drunk, and stumbled upon Myron. Police were interested in this man's story, but he never divulged his name to authorities. Police were ready for his next call, however, and were able to track his location to a phone booth the next time he called and bring him into the police station. Once there, the man claimed that that was the extent of the information that he knew, and that he only had known the information from a secondhand source. The person who had relayed the story to him had overheard the drug dealer bragging loudly about it in a bar. Police investigated his claims, but nothing he had told them was able to be verified. Despite this, the caller pleaded with them to continue looking into the drug dealer as a possible suspect in Myron's death, but in the end, the man was found to be completely discredited. He told the story to police to get revenge on his ex-girlfriend, who had left him in order to live with the drug dealer. Many large-scale searches were conducted to find the missing teenager, but none were successful in turning anything up. Police eventually determined that Myron was not a runaway, though they did toy with this idea for a while, and they determined that he was most likely a victim of a crime, despite not finding any evidence of foul play occurring. Myron's case was one of 3 missing persons cases in Phoenix that year, and it was deemed as the highest priority. Many tips poured into their offices, some stating that Myron had been murdered and where they could find his buried body. With each tip, officers investigated and searched, even conducting digs. But once again, nothing was discovered. Like I said, investigators did toy with the idea that Myron had run away, but the family adamantly denied that this would have happened, with the family members saying, quote, "He wouldn't have. He was a quiet little boy. He didn't cuss as far as I know, and he wasn't into drugs. He had so much ahead of him and so much to look forward to." End quote. They investigated the family to clear them as well. Myron's father was in jail at the time of his disappearance, and his mother, Debbie, had passed that polygraph test. However, this wasn't enough for a lot of people in the community to stop pointing their fingers at Debbie, questioning why she had let Myron go into the fish and chip shop when she had never done so before. And even Myron's best friend had suspicions against Debbie, stating in a 1990 interview, quote, "I believe his mom owed money to someone." End quote. However, a detective on the case refuted this, saying, quote, "All the information checked out. These allegations on the mother aren't supported." End quote. Despite this statement being said by a detective on the case, other detectives weren't so eager to want to eliminate Debbie, with a couple of detectives definitively stating to Myron's aunt that they believed Debbie had taken something in order to help her pass the test. Myron's aunt, Sandra, supported this statement, saying that Debbie had a drug addiction, particularly cocaine, and that despite her being the oldest sibling in the family, it was often the younger siblings who helped take care of her and Myron. A theory and rumor emerged that Myron was killed in an act of revenge by Debbie's boyfriend, Geddes Mintz. It was well known that Geddes was involved in the local drug trade and that Debbie was a known drug user. Despite finding no evidence that Debbie was in debt to anyone, police theorized that she may have owed Geddes money, and when she was unable to pay, Geddes killed her son. Alternatively, police also theorized that Myron, angry at his mother's boyfriend, confronted Geddes about his drug use, and Geddes killed the boy out of anger. A witness came forward claiming that they had seen Geddes around the fish and chip shop on the night of Myron's disappearance as well. To compound this theory, Myron's grandmother told a story of how Geddes arrived at her home the evening that Myron went missing, with his arm in a sling. When asked what happened to his arm, Geddes told his girlfriend and her mother that he had been bitten by a dog. Police and the family believe that the injured arm came from a fight with Myron, leading to Myron's death. Geddes Mintz is currently imprisoned in Arizona. In 2009, he stabbed his girlfriend and her mother in their Peoria, Arizona home. His girlfriend died from her injuries, and Geddes was convicted of second-degree murder as well as aggravated assault. He was sentenced to 42 years in prison, where he remains today. As far as Myron's case, Geddes refuses to be interviewed about it. Strangely, in 1991, An anonymous letter was mailed to the police and Myron's family regarding where Myron can be found. The letter claimed that the boy was buried on a private property near 24th Street and Jones Avenue in Phoenix. A search was conducted as well as a dig, yet nothing was uncovered leading to evidence regarding this case. Police now believe that Myron was killed and buried near where he was last seen, on 16th Street and Southern Avenue, near the OK Fish and Chips restaurant. Myron's Aunt Sandra has also had other anonymous letters come into her home, speaking about the disappearance of Myron. One letter stated, quote, "Hello. I am not going to leave my name due to fear of what may happen to my mother, who still lives in Phoenix, as what I have to say is the truth about some very bad, soulless bastards. Now, why isn't the Phoenix police doing anything about it since a dozen or so people have come forth? The word on the street is that Kiko is a paid snitch working for them." End quote. This letter was typed on a typewriter and post-stamped from Texas, though no return address was listed. The letter went on to say that Byron was murdered due to entanglement in the Mexican mafia, and specifically, two local men named Kiko and Uncle Tony. A future letter to Sandra gave more detail, stating that these two men took Byron to where chicken fights were held and fed his body to the hogs there. The letter stated that the two men then returned 2 days later, gathered what was left of the boy, and put him in the trash can. These letters were signed "A Friend," and it is still unknown who had ever sent them. On October 22, 2016, after Sandra had moved into the home on Pecan Street, she heard a loud banging on her front door. One of three men standing on her front porch shouted, quote, "My last name is Traylor, and I'm here from Texas. My mama told me I had a bunch of kinfolk out here. Are you family?" End quote. Then the man asked for Sandra's son, Martel, by name. Sandra was understandably frightened, as she was home alone at the time and she did not answer the door. She told the men to come back another time when someone else was home, and she would speak to them then. The men never returned, and Sandra regrets not opening the door that evening, just in case it had actually been Myron. Sadly, Debbie passed away in March of 2002, 14 years after her son's disappearance, at the age of 45. Myron's Aunt Sandra still advocates for her nephew, believing that someone in the Phoenix area knows exactly what happened to Myron, and believes that justice will one day be served. The whole Traylor family is searching for closure, the closure that they've been desperately needing for the last 36 years. Sandra looks at Myron's age-progressed composite drawings at times, seeing her young 13-year-old nephew transformed into a man, and jokingly stated that she doesn't know who that man is, but he does need to shave. When last seen, Myron was described as standing at 5 feet 5 inches and weighing around 110 pounds. He had black hair and brown eyes, and was last seen wearing a red and white striped shirt, blue and white shorts, and white sneakers. He was also carrying a plastic bag filled with laundry. Now, let's dive into the theories surrounding the Myron Traylor case. A lot of rumors and tips circulated the case, and clearly, not all were credible. We have the man who persistently called in with a tip about a local drug dealer who had supposedly confessed to assaulting a child and burying him in the backyard of a nearby house. But in the end, this caller was completely discredited and was deemed to have made it up in order to get revenge on his ex-girlfriend who had moved in with the drug dealer. I have to say, it's incredibly disgusting to insert yourself into an investigation of a missing person in order to satisfy your own selfish needs. But unfortunately, this is not the first nor the last time that this has ever happened. Next, we have the theory that Debbie, Myron's mom, sold Myron to repay a debt. It was said by police and backed up by Sandra that Debbie might have taken something in order to pass her polygraph test. And I can't say one way or another about that. Had she taken something, it might have been to calm her nerves, or Possibly she knew something more about the disappearance of Myron and didn't want to be found out. I find it to be unlikely that Debbie sold off Myron to repay a debt, because if she had, why would she allow him to go into the fish and chip shop in the first place? Unless it was to create some kind of alibi and doubt in everyone's mind that he wasn't last seen with her and that he was last seen alone leaving the shop. I would be curious to know more about the timeline of when Debbie arrived at her mother's home and if she had ever left prior to going to the shop to inquire about Myron. I will say, just because someone has a drug addiction doesn't mean they are depraved enough to sell their own son to repay a debt, and police never found any evidence that Debbie owed money to anyone. It was said that Debbie wasn't particularly close to her son and that she had dropped him with family more often than not. But again, that doesn't automatically make her a suspect either. The next theory comes from the letters received by the police department and Sandra. The letter stated that Myron was kidnapped by two men from the Mexican mafia and eventually killed and fed to hogs. This theory seems really out there, especially due to the fact that the letter writer hadn't even gotten Myron's name correct, instead calling him Byron. It was never determined who wrote the letter, nor who Tony and Kiko could be. To me, this seems like another instance of someone inserting themselves into the investigation for their own sick or selfish reasons. But since there is so little information out there about the letter, and especially regarding who had sent it feels almost impossible to say if there was any legitimacy to it. Another theory is that Myron is still alive and had gone to Texas and eventually ended up at Sandra's front door. The person at the door stated that their last name was Traylor and that Sandra might be kinfolk. But what seems odd to me is that Myron disappeared when he was 13 and certainly would have remembered his childhood and his aunt. It seems unlikely that the man at Sandra's door was her nephew, and it seems more likely that it was someone who was either trying to use that story as a ruse for Sandra to open her front door or as some kind of sick joke. As much as Sandra regrets not opening the door, and understandably so, I certainly believe that she made the right choice in prioritizing her safety above anything else and not answering them. Had it really been Myron, I believe that he would have continued to try and make contact, either by returning or by the phone, and Sandra would know by now if it was really him or not. And the final theory, and most likely one in my opinion, is that Geddes Mintz was responsible for whatever had happened to Myron that day in 1988. Geddes was said to have seen Myron around the shop that evening, had been in the area, and most damning, had shown up at Debbie's mother's home wearing a sling on his arm. Geddes claimed that the sling was due to being bitten by a dog, and while I can't refute that, the fact that he was injured on the same night that his girlfriend's son went missing and he was in the area says to me that he most likely encountered Myron and some sort of struggle ensued. The fact that he later went on to murder his girlfriend and attempt to murder her mother proves what a violent person he is and that he is capable of taking the life of another. I believe the theory that Myron had possibly confronted Geddes, or the theory that Geddes was upset with Debbie, had been the catalyst of what happened to Myron. I think that either Myron or Geddes confronted the other, and it led to Myron being killed. What I wonder is where this had happened. I don't know what the area looked like in the 1980s, but currently 16th Street in Southern is a pretty populated area, and Southern is a very busy road. There was an empty field and parking lot nearby, so maybe it happened there and was concealed from the road or any passerbys behind a building. In the end, we know that Geddes was a violent man capable of killing, and he ended up injured and inserting himself into the mix on the night that Myron went missing. And to me, that makes him the best candidate as to who harmed Myron. Sadly, with so much time that has passed, it seems unlikely that Myron will ever get justice, but I can only hope that his body is one day found and he is returned to Sandra and his family for a proper burial next to his mother. Thank you so much for listening to Across State Lines, and we will be back next week to dive into another unsolved case. Please follow or subscribe to Across State Lines on your podcast listening platform so that way new episodes will drop directly into your listening feed. If you'd like to rate or review Across State Lines on whatever platform you listen to, it would be greatly appreciated. Thank you so much, and join us again next week.